One of the really big changes about this lifestyle is not having things, and that was one of the really big transitions getting out of life in the United States. It was as simple as getting all that junk out of the closets, out of the cupboards, out of the garage, and getting rid of everything. How we did it was different ways. Certain things we sold, certain things we gave away to friends and family. Certain things we boxed up and brought to Goodwill. And then some things, if absolutely nobody wanted them and they'd kind of really gone past their useful lives, those would, of course, go into, recycling as much as possible. Again, I mentioned donations, of course. Everything that anybody could use would go to that. And then some things just have to go to the dumpster. The part of that isn't that difficult is actually just getting rid of everything. It takes time, it takes organizing. But the bigger part of it is knowing that you're simply not going to have all that stuff anymore. Things like old family photographs. We kept them in that we took pictures, we took photos of all of our photos that we could keep now stored on iCloud, which is a lot better for those old photos anyway, because those will never wear down and fade out. So it's good to have them, but you don't have the originals, and that's just how it goes. So people that think they're going to be nostalgic when they don't actually have these physical things, I just want to ask you one thing. Okay, I'm not going to ask anything. I'm just going to say it right, put it right out there. We all start out in this world thinking we own stuff and thinking we can own more stuff and we can accumulate more stuff. Well, it was a big year for me for 2024, not just losing parents and losing our dog, but for gaining realizations. And the big realization that came to me, a couple of them. One of them was, you don't own anything. You don't own your house. You don't own your stuff in your closet. You don't own your money. You don't own anything. Okay? There's going to be one day that you're going to end up like Greg's mom and my dad and our dog, where you have nothing left anymore. So you have to kind of ask yourself, was that stuff really worth it while I was alive? And especially those last few months, when I would go to visit my father in assisted living, thank God for assisted living, he couldn't see pretty much. He almost couldn't see. He could see shadows. His dementia was getting pretty advanced. He was living in a wheelchair. This was another thing that started from COVID. He didn't have great mobility before COVID, but during COVID, when nobody was allowed to leave their home, he just sat on his couch and watched TV, and I kept trying to talk to him and suggest that he get up and move around, and he wasn't having any of it. So he did that for almost a year, and by the time we were all told we were allowed to leave our homes and go places and do things, well, at that point, he couldn't get out of his couch. First, he didn't want to, and then he couldn't. So between that, the dementia, and what they're saying is that not doing anything certainly didn't help the older population either. So I think that those two kind of fed into one another, the dementia and the lack of mobility, and the fact that he couldn't see, so he couldn't read, he couldn't, I say watch TV, he basically turned on the TV and watched the shadows and listened to dialogue. That was about it. And he was falling down a lot. So it got the point that the landlady couldn't have him staying in her house. She had a duplex house, and he rented one half of the house and she rented the other. And every time he came crashing down, she had to go over to pick him up. She couldn't do it. I couldn't have done it. I can't pick up a 180-pound man. And so he couldn't stay with his family. He couldn't stay with her. He had to go to an assisted living. Now, fortunately for him, he worked at a time when you could be supporting a lower middle class family, which is what we were, on one person's salary, which is what his was. And not only that, but with that very modest salary, he was able to keep putting money away, and he invested it. He gave it to an investor. He didn't put it in a bank. And by the time he was last few years of his life, he had accumulated quite the little nest egg, and he could afford to live in an assisted living for the last couple years of his life. He probably couldn't have done it for 10 years, but he was in his 90s, and he had more than enough for that to be the case. So he did live in assisted living. So did Greg's mom, also for the last, I don't remember how long. It was also maybe a couple of years, I think, something like that. I'm forgetting now. But I would go and see them. And I would see my father. Now, my father, I know this is going to sound like I'm just saying this because he's my father, but I swear I'm not. He's the most charismatic person I've ever seen. I mean, you can watch movies of Cary Grant always gets the girl and George Clooney always gets the girl. I swear they had nothing on him. Okay, it wasn't about looks. It wasn't about he wore perfect suits. It was about he just could brighten up at any moment of any day and make jokes and make people laugh and flirt with every woman he looked at or didn't look at, even at the end of his life when he could barely see anything. He was never short of compliments to the female staffers at the assisted living and to the other residents. And when I would go and see him, there was a little elderly lady, and she considered him kind of like her little boyfriend. She would there would be lunchtime or dinner time I'd be visiting, and the staff would tell me, you have to let your father go. He's got his lady friend waiting for him. And I'd say, what? And I would go, and there would be this little lady waiting for her guy. And the staff would always tell me how funny he was and how he was always flirting with them. And one of the last things he ever did when he was getting close to 94 and getting right up to the end of his life was like ask one of the staffers out on a date. Okay, he couldn't see her, he couldn't walk, but he wanted to ask her out on a date. And he did these really funny things, and he was always socializing with somebody, playing cards with somebody, winning cards most of the time. He had very good mathematical brain, and he did that stuff really well. But then sometimes his team would lose, which didn't happen very often. But when it did, he would say to me, oh, well, this week our team lost, and it never loses. We won for the past 10 weeks, but it's good. It's good because everybody deserves to win sometime. Everybody needs to win. So this is good. This is good that the other side won. So little insight into his mind. And in terms of Greg's mother, we would go, and sometimes everybody was in their room, but a lot of times they would have a get together of people in the common area, and everybody would sit around a large table. And it was maybe, I don't know, sometimes about 20 people there. And they would just sit and wait until somebody had something to say, and then somebody else would respond, and then somebody would make a joke, and everybody would laugh, and then the next thing would get said, and they just sat all around together, chatting and being together. And I would look at that, and I would look at the interactions between my dad and his card partners and his lady friend at lunch and at dinner. And I just had the realization, seeing all of that, that is life. That's what it is, and that's what you're left with at the end of it. Nobody's thinking about the junk in their closet. Nobody's thinking about all those, the extra set of cups for the guests that you have shoved all the way back in the cabinets. Aren't these nice cabinets, by the way? This is a very nice house that we're staying in at the moment. We've got another week here and then we move on. Just a little something, because I've been observing how pleasant this kitchen has been. So anyway, at some point, you just realize that they're just things. The stuff that you own, it's just stuff. It's not going to make you happy. You're not going to wake up one night at 3 a.m. going, oh, I remember what I did with that little sponge widget on a stick. It's in the back of closet number 2 upstairs in the hall. Gosh, I miss that. You're not going to go through that. But you might wake up at 3 a.m. going, those were awesome people that I met on our last trip to Kuala Lumpur. We have to remember to keep in touch with them. It's about the people. It's about the memories. For me, it's about the animals. To me, they're my favorite people, you know. It's about memories. And that is something that you build on when you're on this kind of nomad lifestyle. That's what you've got. What you've got in your suitcase is it's just something to wear today and tomorrow and the next day, and then you better wash them because you won't have anything else to wear. But that's okay, because you're trading that in for memories. Because the one thing that nobody can take away from you is what's here. And I know what I said about the dementia, and it's easy to say, wait a minute, people or something can take that away from you. You lose your memory, or you can lose your memory. It's certainly the last memory that my dad ever lost. In fact, he didn't, I should say it the other way around. It's the last memory that he had left was his family. You know, all the things that he forgot over the years, the things he didn't forget are me and his sons. You know, he always had that with him. And sure, it could have been more forgetting than that. If he had lived another year or two, maybe he wouldn't have known me at all. But what I'm saying is that was the last of his memories. And even then, when you do lose a large portion of your memory and there's little things that are left, yet part of it is the most important people in your life. And part of it is still some of your most treasured memories, and memories from, you know, he could always talk about his childhood, you know, growing up, what his parents were like, what his home was like. That's what he had left. You know, Lindsey Graham just died, right? What was it, a few weeks ago? Okay. What did he take with him? What did Steve Jobs take with him with all the money that he made? Did he take any of that? And did it matter as much to him in the last few hours of his life as my father's family mattered to him? I don't know. Was he happy that, well, anyway, blah, blah, blah. I've lost my focus, but you get the idea. So that's what you're doing when you're building a life of nomad travel. Is you're letting go things that I swear, you never owned them, and building up the one thing that you can have, and that's what you carry with you. It's your memories. It's the people in your life. It's the relationships, I should say. The not even relationships, the connections. I like connections because then it's not just about people, it's about the dogs, and other animals, certainly, but we just seem to see many more dogs than anything else. So I'll say dogs, and if you're a cat person, don't take it personally. Cats are wonderful too. I just don't see them as often. Maybe next time talk about, I know everybody always wants to know the numbers. What do expenses look like, and how do they compare with what expenses are like if you're watching from the US in the US. I can tell you, I spent a lot of time in the UK, and the UK seems to be kind of similar to the US. It may not be identical, but it does have a lot of similarities in terms of groceries and hotels. I still think you can get much better hotel prices in the UK. Maybe not in London, but in other parts, smaller, quieter parts of the UK, whereas we stayed in some small, quiet, out there parts of the US, and it was still prohibitively expensive. I think that's about it. And my tea's getting cold, and I left the tea bag in it, and doesn't bother me. That's it for now. Till next time.